We should be recording right now. So welcome everyone to the webinar on the CodeGrade API. And Thomas just introduced it really nicely. And with the new API update we have, it's way more easy for you to use it. So with this webinar, we try to give you some basics on how you can get started with the API and get the most of it to automate some of the workflows that you have. So for today's webinar, I have a large schedule. And we'll start with the API basics. So really easy, installing the Python package, importing the package into Python, and logging in using the API. There's two ways to do that, and I'll go over them. Then after that, I have a couple of examples prepared for you that we can go over. The first example I'd like to program together with you and show you the steps on how to do that. And that is an export example where we're going to analyze the progress of an individual student. So of course they can upload many times and we can see the progress over those multiple submissions. Then we also have a export of feedback example where we export all the inline feedback of a student or over all submissions. And finally, a very common request is the Git configuration automation, so that we automatically connect student Git repos to their CodeGrade. So they don't have to do that manually, and we can all do that using the CodeGrade API and GitHub API up front. I'm not gonna code this together with you, but I'll show you the code and go over it step by step. All of the examples I am showing you in this webinar, and also some other examples can be downloaded from our website, so you can get started with them right away. All right, so let's start with the basics. And as part of the new update that Thomas just mentioned, we have an updated API documentation as well, which you can find on docs.codegrade.com/API, which shows you all the functions and all the commands that you can use. So definitely check that out when you're using the API. Then to use the API, you can download it as a Python package, and it's available on PyPy, where you can also find some more information about it. So for you, this means that all you have to do is very easily install it using pip3 install CodeGrade or python3-m pip install CodeGrade. With every release, there will be a new version of the Python package, so regularly updated as well. After you've downloaded the Python package, you can now just really easily import it to your Python scripts. Just like you would do with any other package like NumPy or Pandas, you can just import it using import CodeGrade, and then you can use all of the APIs of CodeGrade. Now, once you've imported it, you have to, of course, log in to CodeGrade. So you can do things with the API, of course, and you have to do that in your account. And there's two ways to log in. One is to hard code your information in your code, and another one is to do it all via the command line. So A is a little bit easier for you to do while you are prototyping your code. So for instance, you want to try it out. This will allow you to, every time you run it, to automatically log in without having to go through all these command line input prompts. The other option right here is easier if you want your code to be used by other people as well, as this will just show you all the prompts in the command line where you will be prompted to give up your tenant, your username, and your password. So if you're using the hard-coded way, it's a good idea to not hard-code your password, of course, in your code and have it there as plain text. So for that, what you can use is an environment variable, which in this case we called a CG password. And you can set the CG password environment variable by using this command. So it's export a CG_password and then equals your password. And if you do that, then you can simply run this and it will take the password from the environment variable. Of course, what you can even do is have your username and your tenant also in environment variables, which means that you don't have to hard code them at all in your code. So that's up to you. Anything you want to add, Thomas?
Yeah, so I would want to add that if you export your password as an environment variable like this, be careful about your bash history because it might be saved in your bash history file. So either prefix the command export with a space, which prevents it from being saved, or use something like a password manager that allows you to export it using a password manager.
And that's why you're here. Thanks. Awesome. So after you've logged in, of course, for some of you that are using CodeGrade through your learning management system, you will not have a password already. And you will have to set one up before using the API, since you cannot log in with your learning management password. So for that, what you can do is you can follow this guide. It's pretty easy. What you do is you go to your user settings, you press the I here, and you get the option to reset your password. With this, you get your CodeGrade password, which in combination with your username allows you to log in to the API. So that's how you can do that. Great. So now that we've covered that, I would like to go with our first export example. And for this example, as I already mentioned, what we try to do is analyze the progress of one individual student in one assignment. So really basic. And to do that, we first find all the submissions from a student, and then we get the grades with that. And the API calls we use are submission and .get the user ID to get the user ID from a submission, since we need that user ID in our second API call to get all the submissions by the user, and we have to give the user ID right here. So those are the two steps we use, and then we just print that out. Of course, we can save it in a CSV file or export it in any other way, but for just the sake of learning to use the API, we'll just print it out to make it a little bit easier. All right, so the steps: first, log into CodeGrade and create the client, which I just showed you. Second step is to get the user ID of a student via a random submission from the student. So sometimes it could be hard to find out what the user ID of a student is, but a submission ID of an assignment ID is way easier to find out, as that is simply in the URL of CodeGrade. You'll have assignment/ID/submission/that ID. So with a simple submission ID that we found, we can get the user ID. Then after that, we can get all the submissions of the assignment by this user, and finally print the information. So this is the final script, but let's create that together. And I'll open my Visual Studio. This is still visible, right? Create a file called export progress. And let's start by importing CodeGrade and importing OS, since we need OS to get the environment variable. So first thing, we can log into CodeGrade, and let's do that right now via the call it client, and we use CodeGrade login. Yeah.
Just to interrupt, could you maybe increase your font size a bit?
Definitely.
Because that would be easier to view.
Is this better?
Yeah.
Thank you. All right. So we use login. If you want to do it via the command line, you can use login from command line interface. So let's do login here. So first, let's give a username, which in this case is my username info@CodeGrade. And then have the password. So in this case, that is the environment variable that we set, of course. So that is os get env. And then we called it cg_password. And the last one is the tenant. And this is the full name of your tenant. So that is, in this case, since it's an example, it's the CodeGrade sandbox. But usually this is just the full name of your university, and you'll be able to find the full name of that on the CodeGrade login page to find out what you should write here. All right, so after we've logged in, we can now use this client for our API calls. And as we said, the first thing we want to do, and let me go back to the slides here, is to get the user ID of the student via a random submission from the student. So let's get the user ID. And let's call the client, and we want a submission. So we use the submission, and then we say get, and we get a submission, and then we can give a submission ID, which we can find in our URL. So our submission ID in this case is 157093. So this submission ID, again, you can find in your URL. And if I show you that right here, click on it, you'll find in the URL here, so it's app.codegrade, courses, this is the ID of your course, then assignments, then this is the ID of your assignment, and the submissions, this is the ID of your submission. So this is the ID that we are using right now. And to find the user ID, all we have to do after that is type in user to get the user of the submission. And then from this user object, we get the ID. So pretty straightforward. And as you can see, if you're using a good IDE, you'll get nice autocomplete, and it will show you exactly which functions you can use or which fields you can access. So now that we got the user ID, all we have to do is find all the submissions by this user. So let me call that submissions equals client.assignment.get all submissions, or sorry, get submissions by user. So you would have done all submissions, we would get all submissions, but now we of course want only all submissions by a specific user. And to do that, we can now type in an assignment ID. Again, you can find this in your URL. In this case, we want submissions from the assignment 1226. And then all we have to do is give the user ID, which we just found up here through the submission that we used. So that is just the field user ID. Now that we've done that, we have found a list of all the submissions by this user with the user ID that we found here in the assignment with ID 1226. So all we have to do now is loop over these submissions and in some way print or append to a CSV the progress of these individual submissions. So for submissions, we simply use a for each loop to loop all over them. And again, so the reason why we're doing this is because in CodeGrade, of course, a student can have multiple submissions, and with automatic testing, they can get multiple grades for each of these submissions. So in this way, you can see the progress of a student from the automatic feedback in their assignment. And let's print this out right now. And let's simply print out when the submission is uploaded. And I know Thomas is going to hate how gross this is going to look, but I'm just going to do it like this. And I'm going to say submission. Oh, so this is the individual submission object from the list of submissions that we got here, submission dot created at. So this is the date that it was uploaded. And then plus, and we're going to append to the string, grade equals, and then finally we want the grade, of course. So we say submission, and we get the grade. As you can see, this is really easy. We have this one submission object, and we can get all these variables from the submission and just access them like this, print them out, or do whatever we want with them. So of course, this is a very easy example where we just print out the date and the grade, but you can use this example to improve and add to this to maybe append it to a CSV instead of just printing it out. So let me show you in the terminal here what this looks like. So let me start off with going to the right folder. Yes, all right. And let me run this script. So it's called export progress. So I just use Python 3 to run it. And I've already set my environment variable with my password before this. And after I run it, I made a mistake. Did I make a typo? Yes, I did. Tenant, not tenant. Yes, so now it will show us the different submissions. So the upload time and the grade. And as we can see, the student went from first a 3 to a 5 to a 5 to a 7 to a 10. And let me make this a little bit bigger as well. We created a really easy script to extract this from CodeGrade. So again, the final script, we have it right here, like this. And this script will also be available for download in the blog post that is with this webinar. Thomas, is there any question that we can answer right now?
No, not at this moment, no.
Great. So let's continue with the next example. And this one is very similar to the last one, but in this case, we want to export all the inline comments. And for all the latest submissions of one assignment. So not from one student, but all the submissions. And to do this, what we do is we have to find all the latest submissions in an assignment and then get the feedback on them and print in a human readable format. Of course, you can also append this to a CSV or use this in any other system that you want to hook up to your API. So for that, we have two API calls again here. So first, from the assignment, we say get all the submissions. So last script, we use the get submissions by student. In this case, we say get all submissions independent of the student. And then after that, we get the feedback from all of these individual submissions. So as you can see, we use the submission model right there, or class. And so again, we will probably loop through all of these submissions. So the steps for this: log into CodeGrade and create the client, get all these submissions from an assignment. And in this case, we use all the latest submissions, loop over these submissions and get the comments, and then print them or append them to a CSV. And let me go back to the editor here and create a new file. And let me do that a little bit differently. File, export feedback. Hi. All right, and let's copy this over because this will be exactly the same. And after that, right now, is we have to get all the submissions instead of just one submission by student. So we say submissions is client. And again, the client that we're using all the time is the client that is the login that we created up here. So that is the CodeGrade client. And from assignment, we say get all submissions. And as you can see by the options, we could have also taken other things like get all feedback, get all graders, get all plagiarism runs, all of that. But in this case, we say get all submissions. And of course, we have to give up the assignment ID again. Again, you can find this in the URL. And we'll use this one this time. And now what we can do is we can use the latest only field, which by default is false, but we want to be true. So we only get the latest submissions by all the students. Now what we do is we loop over all of these submissions. Again, this is just a simple list for submission submissions. And what we want, just to make it a little bit more readable, is we want to start with the submission name. So or the name of the submission submitter. So let's start with submission by, and then add, or let's do this in a way that Thomas likes it. Format, and then add submission. So from the submission that we are looking at right now, we get the user. So from that user, we want the name. So in the last example, from a user, we took the ID. This time we want the name. And in that way, there's also different variables that you can use. All right, so now we have to get the feedback from all of these submissions. So to do that, or from this submission, we say feedback equals client dot submission dot get feedback. And we have to give the submission ID. So submission is submission user.id, and we say with replies. So by default, that is false. And we also want it to be false, but let me just write it down so everyone understands what's going on. So of course, with CodeGrade, after you've given feedback, a student can reply to that, or if a student asks a question, then you as a teacher can reply to that. And in this case, all we want is the first initial entries of inline feedback. But if you want all, of course, you can use true here and you get all of the feedback. So now we got the feedback of this individual assignment. What we do is we loop over all of this feedback. So we say for file ID and comments, user.items. And for this, how I found out that I have to find the file ID and the comments. There we go. I went to our documentation and I found the API documentation. And what I did here is I typed in feedback.
You need to zoom in a bit, I think.
Yes, I will. Great. So, so what we see here is that when you export the feedback, what you get is a user, and then in that user, you have a file ID and you have a list of comments. So that is these, oh, not this one, sorry, this one. And in here, you have a file ID and a list of comments. So that is what we are using right here. So after that, we want to loop through all of these comments. So we say for author ID and comments in comments dot items, and we take the author ID and the comment for all of these comments. So all of these comments have an author, of course, and this author is mapped again with the author ID. So the best way to find out about all of these different variables is, of course, again, the documentation. And you can also just print the JSON string that you get as a output of this. So now we can use the author. We can find the author, which is feedback.authors. And then we get the file ID and the author name. And then finally, we can print the author and the feedback that the author gave. So we got the author name right here. And the feedback is simply this comment right here. So with that, what we have is so we want the author and the comments printed here. And if we run this, export a little bit better, Python 3 export feedback. We'll see that we say submission by test student, and then the CodeGrade admin says awesome. CodeGrade admin says great job with this line, and then another submission by another test student without capital S says ask our question. So in this way, we can get the feedback from a file. And again, I'm just printing it here. And right here, I'm just printing whose submission it is. But you can find a smart way to export this to a CSV or hook up your own system with this script. Thomas, is there a question?
I don't think there's any open questions, but maybe someone wants to ask it live. No, so then I think we can continue to the next example.
All right, so this Git example is a little bit more of a concrete example, also something I'm not going to code together with you since this is a little bit more elaborate. But this has been used by many instructors who use Git and CodeGrade. And what the goal is of this is to automatically set up our GitHub repos and connect them to the right students in CodeGrade. And to give some background, you can set up your assignment in CodeGrade to allow your students to hand in via Git. And what these teachers did is they have an organization on GitHub with a individual repository per student. And what they want is they want to automatically seed the webhook and deploy key information to these individual repositories, so the students can just start working, and every time they do a git push, they will automatically upload to CodeGrade without ever having to manually set anything up. And how they do that is they use the CodeGrade API to get all the students from their course and to find the webhook data for those students. So all the students have individual webhook data that can be used like this. There's also teachers that use this same script for groups, and they've rewritten it a little bit to make it work with that. That's also possible. Then after that, they use the GitHub API to create a repository per student. And after they've created that repository for each student, they connect the correct webhook to the CodeGrade assignment. Only thing they have to do here is manually create a mapping between the CodeGrade students and the GitHub repositories. But even that you can do automatically if you automatically create the GitHub repositories yourself. So from CodeGrade, the API that you have to use is the assignment.getCourse.id to get the ID of your course. Then after that, you have to use the get all users to get all the users from this course. And then finally, you have to get the webhook setting per user in your course. And to do that, first of all, get a list of all the users in your course, then get the webhook settings for them, generate the webhook details. So for instance, the webhook URL, the secret, and the key. And finally, write these things to a CSV file. Afterwards, create a mapping and use the GitHub API to create and populate the repositories. So to go over the code, and again, you can download this via our blog. Also, the GitHub API script is available there, which was created in collaboration with the University of Edinburgh. And the first function we use here is the get user. So we say from this course, we get all users given this course ID. So from what we've done before, this should be pretty familiar. From the course, we say get all users and the course ID we give. Then after that, we have to find the webhook data per user. So this is a function that we call for all the, so this is a function we call for each student. So we give the client again, and we give the username of this individual student, and again, the assignment ID. And then from the assignment, we say get webhook settings. We provide the assignment ID. We say that the webhook type is Git. And in this case, all webhook types are Git. But perhaps in the future, we'll add something to this. But for you now, you can always leave this to Git. And then we say as extra parameters, since we want this from a specific user, we say the author has to be the username. And the username is given here. So as again, what we're getting in this, using this function is all the users. So not just the students, it's also the teachers from your course. So what we get right here is also the username for all the users. So do not mistake here that this is only students. This could also be teachers or teaching assistants or any other roles that are there. So if we continue here, we have to generate the webhook details, and we have a separate function for that, where we provide the webhook data that we got right here, and we construct our URL and our secret and our key. So the secret and the key are very concretely just in the webhook URL. Don't have to do anything about that. The URL is something we have to construct, and that is because not all the CodeGrade URLs are the same. So it could be that most of you are on app.codegrade, but some of you also are on, let's say, ed.codegrade, uva.codegrade. So if that is the case, you have to add this, or in general, you have to add this since it can change. So from the client, you get the base URL of your server, or at least the server you're logged in as. And then after that, you can construct the webhook like this. So we add API v1 webhooks, and then the webhook ID after this. And this is the URL, the webhook URL that we have to give to GitHub when setting up our repository. So after this, we can write all of this data to a CSV, which is pretty easy in Python. This has nothing to do with our API anymore, but we just open a CSV file. And in this case, the file name is roster.csv, which is in this variable. And what we do is we make it a CSV writer, and we write the first row, which is going to be the header row with first our name or the username, the CodeGrade user, and the webhook URL, the secret, and the deploy key. Those things are what we generated right here. And then finally the GitHub user. So we give all this information from the data that we found in these three functions. Only the GitHub user is something we add a question mark in. The reason we leave this last column empty is because this is the place where we can create our manual mapping. So of course, we have to make a mapping going from the CodeGrade user to the GitHub user. And depending on how you set it up, this can be automatic. So you can simply create repositories for all the students based on their CodeGrade username. And that will allow you to not have this mapping. But if the students already have repositories available and they do not conform to their CodeGrade username or something like that, you will have to make a manual mapping going from a CodeGrade user to a GitHub username or a GitHub repo name. So that is what you do right here. So the next steps after this are, of course, automatically or manually creating this mapping, what I just said, and then again to this roster.csv file. Then afterwards, creating and configuring the repos. So you can do this automatically using the GitHub API as well, which is really easy. And if you do this automatically, then you can forget this step, since you can just set up the repos with CodeGrade information and no mapping is needed anymore. Finally, all you have to do is then run the script per assignment. And for each assignment, you'll have different repos that you automatically invite your students to if you manually add their email. And after that, they can start handing in and using these repos. And with every Git push, they'll automatically upload it to CodeGrade. So all of these scripts are available on CodeGrade.com in our blog. You can find them. Also the GitHub script and the also using the GitHub API. So also the script that will connect all the webhooks correctly in GitHub. Thanks to a teacher at the University of Edinburgh. And there's also a README in there, so you can just start using them right away. All these scripts that we've created together are also available right there. The link is already there, so you can start playing right away after this webinar. So if you want more help with our API, feel free to email us at support@codegrade.com. I think it's a great skill to have to at least know the basics of the API and to be able to play around with it a little bit yourself. However, part of our support and consultation is, of course, to also create custom scripts for you or help you with the API where needed. So please do not hesitate to reach out, and me or someone more tech savvy than me, like Thomas, can help you out and create a script for you. So Thomas, are there any final questions before we finish this recorded part of the focus group? It could be interesting.
Yeah, there are a few that I haven't answered to yet on the chat, so I'll quickly do them like this. Yeah. So about testing this before students have submitted. So one of the things you could do is do test submission. And test submissions are simply normal users called test student. And they do have a special flag set, which you can quite easily see if you look at the source code or documentation of our API. And that way you can easily check if things work. You can also, of course, simply submit as yourself, and then you can also like check with multiple users as well.
Yes, so exactly that is what I did for this example here. It's a submission by the test student, and it will just be a normal test submission. Yeah.
And so about bulk downloading submissions. So you're in luck. One of the scripts we do provide within the with the blog post is doing exactly that. So getting the latest submissions from the entire assignment and bulk downloading them and extracting them to a certain place on your PC.
Yeah.
So if you need help with that script, drop us a line.
Yes. Any other questions? Oh, I'm going the wrong way.
No, I think I've answered them all. But if I missed one, please let me know.
Anything you think is interesting to share with the rest?
No, I'm just really looking forward to see any possible cool uses of the API. And if I see the creativity here, I think that will be going very well.
Awesome. So yeah, definitely. We've had teachers sharing API scripts with us that allowed us to help other teachers with it as well. There's even some teachers that have published them in GitHub repositories that they publicly shared. So if you happen to create anything useful or have a cool script that you want to share, feel free to also send us an email about that. We're always really happy to see that and well, just see what you come up with.